Good news, everyone! Tonight, trans triumphs around the world. Shapiro gets steamrolled. A big legal win long overdue. And more. Good news starts right now. Last week, thousands in Taipei celebrated the 6th annual Trans March, organized by Taiwan's equivalent of the LGBT Hotline Association. The march precedes the General Pride Festival the following day, which has been running for decades and attracts hundreds of thousands of participants. Taiwan is one of the countries that still requires full gender affirmation surgery in order to enact legal changes to identity documents, such as name and gender marker. That's a rule activists are hoping to change. One French foreign exchange student thought the requirement was strangely behind the times, since France has moved past what international bodies now recognize amounts to forced sterilization years ago. Quote, "You should not have to change your body if that isn't what you want to do," he said. Gender is not limited to just two options, many participants' signs and slogans stated. That's a sentiment shared by Sean Du, head of the LGBT Hotline Association responsible for organizing the event. He said the purpose of the march is to support both non-binary and binary trans people to strengthen community in Taipei. He said he hopes the event will allow more voices to be heard, to build bridges and increase understanding across Taiwan and Asia generally. The Taiwan Trans March is one of a very few anywhere on the continent that focuses specifically on transgender people. But every time any one of us is just a little more visible, it makes it that much easier for a family to accept their child, a school to accept their student, or a trans person to step out of the closet themselves. And we love to see it. On a related note, but the other side of the globe, Germany's new trans rights law is about to take effect. Tomorrow, trans people in Germany will be able to change their names and their gender markers on identity documents with a lot less hassle. The new Self-Determination Act removes the requirements for 2 psychiatric assessments and a court hearing, though the new law does mandate a 3-month waiting period between filing the application and the use of the updated identity. By way of comparison, here in New York, one of the easiest states for trans people to update their records, there is no mandatory waiting period. But judicial approval is required, resulting in an effective wait time between filing and finalization that routinely runs between 2 to 4 months total, and all that before one can even apply to update certain forms, like a birth certificate, which involves a 6-month or more wait for processing. In that context, a 3-month waiting period seems positively speedy. Any German resident 18 or over can file, and 14-year-olds can do so with either parental approval or through legal action. Parents can apply on behalf of younger children, though the child must be present when the form is filed to confirm their assent to the registrar. Trans Parliament member Nike Slawik, seen here addressing the German legislature, praised the reform as a milestone of international significance. She said, quote, "I think it is a sign of hope in times where right-wing populist voices are getting louder again, and there is an unfortunate rollback of rights of queer people in many countries." Germany is the 12th country in the EU to enact a version of self-ID, saving both citizens and government considerable time, money, and headaches. Richard Kohler, advisor for TGEU, said, quote, "Let's face it, it's an issue affecting a small number of people in a very personal way, and respecting their choices doesn't harm anybody else. But it does uphold the core values of dignity and freedom we all share." Kohler went on to explain why trans rights have become the go-to wedge issue in so many nascent fascist movements. Quote, "We're seeing an orchestrated attack against democracy, against equality, against the diversity in our society, and it's deliberate, and it's organized, and it's heavily financed." He said because trans people are easy targets, being such a small minority, we're easy to demonize, to dehumanize, and once one group has been stripped of humanity, it becomes a virtual inevitability the right will do the same thing to other groups. Beate von Meckel, chair of the National Council of German Women's Organizations and a gender researcher herself, has noticed a similar sinister motive. She said, quote, "It is really bitter for the women's movement that this has become a very divisive issue," adding that far-right extremists are doing their level best to split women on this issue by sowing fears of non-existent threats. She said with 60 women's organizations reporting to the National Council, not one has ever encountered a situation where a trans woman did harm to a cis woman. Not in a crisis center, not in a homeless shelter, not in a clinic, not in a bathroom, not one. It does not happen. But the right wants to instill fear, to turn woman against woman, so they can strip all of us of our rights as women. She concludes by saying it doesn't matter if you're cis or trans. There is more than one way of living gender and being a woman. The German press reports 1,200 people have already filed applications, and the Catholic news agency KNA reports similar levels of interest in other big cities. Herzlichen Glückwunsch to our Deutsch siblings. Another survey finds voters prefer candidates who support trans rights. Following close on the heels of a Pew survey showing swing state voters have noticed this year's deluge of anti-trans political ads is a distraction and a giant red flag that Republican candidates have no policy solutions to offer, a new survey shows voters overwhelmingly support trans rights and candidates who stand with the trans community. Meanwhile, they take a dim view of candidates who run anti-trans ads, perceiving them as, quote, mean-spirited and totally out of hand. Over the last year, Data for Progress consistently found that voters see the economy, jobs, and inflation as the most important issues when it comes to deciding which candidate to support, while all LGBT issues rank near the bottom of the list for election priorities. Perhaps more telling, in response to the question, quote, should politicians spend less time talking about transgender issues and more time talking about priority issues like the economy, more Republicans responded agree than Democrats by a full 10 points. The Republican voters are even more sick of their candidate's bull than the general population is. As to transgender issues specifically, voters overwhelmingly trust Democrats over Republicans 2-1, with nearly 1/5 responding that the government shouldn't be involved at all. Asked whether they would support candidates who support trans rights versus a candidate who opposes trans rights, voters chose to support 52% to 31%, suggesting that if the presidential race and other contests are closed out on this issue, as seems to be the only strategy the right is offering in the final days of the election, they can expect a staggering loss. Again, even Republican voters favor government staying out of matters like trans healthcare or trans people in sports, 45% to 42%. Every other category of voter offered a clear majority by more than 2-1. If that isn't telling enough, people take an intensely dim view of the ads using trans people as a political football, affirming by a landslide the following 3 statements. 1. Transgender people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. 2. Republicans using anti-LGBT rhetoric is sad and shameful. And 3. Attack ads against the transgender community are mean-spirited and have gotten out of hand. Republicans, it's not too late to repent your wicked ways. Take these last few days to publicly declare you believe that all humans deserve human rights. Distance yourselves from the obvious hate campaigns that have lost your side election after election and have alienated the voters entirely, and pledge to support only legislation that gets government the hell out of decisions that are properly between physicians and their patients, sports medicine researchers, and, most of all, trans people themselves as very personhood. Or don't. And the voters will let you know. Our top story today comes with a content warning for sexual violence. A Watertown, New York woman has won her case over abuse she suffered at the hands of police for being transgender. Deanna Latreille needed help from police, but got the worst day of her life instead. According to court documents, on September 28, 2017, Deanna had a confrontation with the landlord of her ex-wife where he mocked her for being trans. Quote, he called her pathetic and ridiculous, the lawsuit states. Then, he grabbed a shotgun. Deanna fled, running down the street screaming for help while the man chased her. Eventually, police intercepted them, but to her shock and horror, they were much more interested in her than her attacker. Officers demanded to know why she was, quote, dressed like that, and she explained she was transgender. One officer called her a liar and told her she was a man dressed like a woman. Deanna had been openly trans for 7 years at that point, though it should be noted the process for changing legal documents described in the earlier story has only been available in New York for the past 2 years. In 2017, while there were mechanisms in place allowing a name change, a change to her gender marker was difficult, if not impossible, at that time. After being questioned about her genitals and sexuality, the officers asked how she planned to get home, to which she responded she could walk. One officer replied, quote, we can't let you walk the streets looking like that. She was placed under arrest because of her transgender status, specifically, and I quote from the court documents, for looking like a transgender woman. She directly asked why she was being arrested and was told, quote, you have serious mental problems. You are a guy dressed like a woman. The charge that was filed was criminal mischief in the 4th degree, a misdemeanor. This charge was later reduced to a violation, but remains a legal penalty for existing in public while trans. Being booked at the police station, her wig, which was a kind physically attached to her scalp, was forcibly removed, tearing hair away in chunks. This is not a requirement for booking photos. No cisgender people are ever required to remove hair pieces of any kind. They did this to Deanna because, the officers stated in the court records, they considered her a man dressed as a woman. They published the resulting booking photo to local media, making sure to include her dead name instead of her actual name. It should be noted, under New York's domestic relations law, a name can be legally changed through usage, not necessarily only by a court order. And since Deanna had been using her name for 7 years by that point, it can be argued that that was her legal name at the time of these events. She was later placed in hog-tie restraints, wrists bound to ankles, and carried to a patrol car for transport to the county jail. Officers told her, quote, we are going to show you that you are a man. You are going to the jail and get strip searched. You're going to love that. This was done because the jail's intake protocol requires a visual strip search regardless of the reason for processing. That, however, is not what happened. According to court records, 4 corrections officers, along with the arresting police officer, stayed present for her stripping, mocking her all the while. Her request for reasonable privacy was denied. The audience was enjoying the show. Her request for a female CO to conduct the search was denied because the entire point was to humiliate and degrade her. The CO conducting the search decided on his own volition to conduct a physical cavity search for the benefit of the audience and his own gratification. It should be noted, New York law expressly requires a court order for physical cavity searches, with the only exception being in the case of clear and immediate danger to the officer or arrestee. This was not that. Even when a court order is obtained, such searches are required to be performed by medical personnel, not corrections officers. The CO assaulted her in ways I literally cannot say on this broadcast, but went far beyond the scope of even the pretense of a physical cavity search. Throughout the encounter, the group of men watching insulted and sexually harassed her. When they had finished using her for their fun, Deanna was deposited into a holding cell until morning, when she was brought to a court and arraigned for the terrible offense of being a trans person who needed police to protect her from a shotgun-wielding maniac. It took 7 more years for Deanna to see any measure of justice. With the help of the New York Civil Liberties Union, the case against the Watertown Police Department and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department was settled last Thursday. In addition to compensation for Deanna, the agreement mandates that both agencies adopt policies that bring them into compliance with New York state and federal law. In particular, that they create clear guidelines for the treatment of people, including the use of their names, titles, and pronouns, as well as ensuring respectful transport, search, and booking procedures, and require disciplinary action for officers with repeated complaints of discrimination based on gender. For the county jail, there is the additional requirement that people must be housed consistently with their gender identity and that medical and mental health care be provided without discrimination. So Deanna went through a horrible experience, one that's left her still in therapy for it to this day. But the silver lining is because of her bravery and relentlessness, she's getting more than compensation. She's changed the way 2 agencies operate and sent a shockwave throughout the law enforcement community across New York State. A signal that trans people are not the playthings of bored, bitter men hiding behind tin shields. A warning that they had best get their acts together or consequences would be coming for them too. A couple of weeks ago, I myself was pulled over because an officer had concerns about my ancient broken-down car's safety. And while the deputies I encountered remained professional and I was eventually allowed to go on my way, I found I was terrified the entire time. I couldn't hold my hand steady enough to give the deputy my license. I couldn't remember where I'd put my registration, though it was in the same place I've kept it for over 10 years. I was flustered and shaken for hours after. I live in New York, one of the very safest places for a trans person to live in the US, and stories like Deanna's are not rare. Last year, 2 similar cases were settled, and these are only the incidents where the victims could obtain legal representation and pursue an action over the better part of a decade. Here, in one of the safest states, things like this still happen. Safe is a relative term. Trans people in New York are less likely to be abused or hurt because we're trans, but we are never actually safe. The good news is, of course, Deanna won her case. Justice was served, but perhaps just as important, not only will Jefferson County change their policies, but other counties are following suit. Today, the world is just a little bit less dangerous for people like me because of her courage to stand up and fight back. Normally, we lead off good news with a trans creator you may not have heard about, but that last story was so heavy and this is so good, I just had to move the feature. This week, the spotlight goes to the man that schooled Ben Shapiro so shamelessly in a viral showdown. Let's watch.
Kamala Harris's extreme pro-abortion stance is morally indefensible. Wow, okay, we're going to take this chair. Look at that.
Hey, Ben.
Like a bro, my friend. All right.
I'm a transgender man.
Okay.
I've experienced SA.
Okay.
And abortion rights affect me directly. So if we're talking about the American dream that you live, why don't I have access to that? Because there's no legislation, in the history of America, that legislates a man's body, so why does mine have to be legislated? I've got a vagina.
I'm not interested in what your genitalia are.
Clearly you are. I mean, it's all over everything you make, buddy. I'm sorry. I hate to say it to you, but
I think you can read on my face that I radically am not. I think you can read on my face that I radically am not. When we're talking about abortion...
No, I don't. I mean, you can present it here, but in most of the content that you have, you attack my community constantly. And you don't even realize guys like me exist, who actually share a lot of similarities to you and everything, because I'm a married man of 20 years.
I've
got a wife.
I recognize that you exist. I disagree with your claim that you are a male.
Right, so if I was sexually assaulted, right, and I didn't have access to that abortion care, do you believe that I should have carried that child to term because I was sexually assaulted?
I mean...
No, I just want to make sure that that's what you believe. Because as a transgender man, I have seen your side of the entire political debate, never ever having the conversation of what an American freedom is. Because why am I not allowed to live my American freedom as a man? You know, I mean, you get your choice as a man to live and free and all that.
You're really moving around terminology very wildly here.
And so are you, because that's the tactics you play in your game. And you've done it the entire time. You've jumped from one subject to the next. You speak so fast, and I know how you work. So how does it feel to have it in your face?
Well, I mean...
Because I'm sick and tired of the shit that you have put against my community, especially black trans women. Because you constantly disregard all of our needs and then use us politically as a pawn when we're 1% of the population. Why not focus on the economy itself? All of us are struggling, and you want to focus on trans people. You want to focus on a black woman when this is clearly a glass cliff situation. America's falling apart, and let's give it to a woman right when it's all falling apart, when we'd had, 50 men run it and it looks like shit? Look at where we're at. Surely, where do you think that we're heading? I mean, it's so funny to watch white supremacy just fall apart the way that it is, and you ride so hard. Because guess what? In other countries around the world, women are not having children. And why is it? Because of the patriarchy and all the violence that men perpetuate, and all of this idea that abortion is somehow going to solve it all by forcing women to have abortion instead of focusing on the real problems that we're facing in our society. We're just going to completely ignore that, and we're just going to go, you know what? The line item is, let's make women have babies so that we can continue this capitalistic society that we have. Why are we doing that? What? I mean, why? Because you want to push white supremacy and because you want to make your check? It does great for you? Meanwhile, people like me have to live with the consequences of all of your rhetoric that you put on a daily basis. And including my entire community. And the intersectionalities of black women, men that experience SA, trans people, everyone that comes in. And I'm so sick of the idea that you can come in with this bravado, that you're this big guy that knows things because you can talk fast, you have statistics. But really, what does it really matter at the end of the day if you are harming the entire American... This guy's been accused of rape. Trump. In court documents, and you're backing the guy. You have children. How could you do that to your own... Don't you have a daughter? What is wrong with you, dude? I've never seen such a party just completely the American idea, what we believe in as a country, is not what you're perpetuating. It's diversity. It's giving you tired, hungry, and poor. The Google phone you have in your pocket is because of all of the diversity we've had.
Pause.
Pleasure to meet you.
That man's name is Shane Ivan Nash. While Ben would go on to cry about it, saying Shane was all emotions and no facts and logic, the sad reality is Ben got curb stomped. As an undefeated debater myself, I feel qualified to say that if you fail to address a single thing your opponent says, or even to speak at all for that matter, you've lost. Hard. And while it isn't exactly justice for any of the things Ben has done or the fires he's fed oxygen to, it certainly is cathartic. Shane hosts a trans podcast among many other things, and you can find more of him at tiktok.com/@ShaneIvanNash. If you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe. Transpositions Weekly is the first and only trans news show in the universe, and we need your support to grow the shows we can offer. Join Patreon if you can. Spread the word all over social media to let people know we're here, and tell us what stories matter to you by joining the community on Discord. Hit like and leave a comment. Discord, of course, is where the memes live, and our meme of the week was posted by Bumblebee. And if you don't mind risking permanent joyfulness, join us. Also, if you have good news concerning trans people you'd like to see reported on, you can tell us about that in the Discord as well. For the Transpositions, I've been Ember Belrad.